Hi Reddit, I am Savannah Blake, 28 years old, and from the outside, my childhood looked like it could have been ripped straight from the opening scene of a Hallmark movie. Perfectly manicured lawns lined our neighborhood, everyone waved at each other like we were living in some utopian suburb, and every 4th of July my parents, Richard, 62, and Diane, 59, would ride in the country club's convertible during the parade, smiling and waving as if they were suburban royalty. They loved the performance of being the perfect family. They loved telling people that they were self-made, spinning tales about how they had clawed their way up from nothing. The reality was far less romantic. My grandmother left them a significant inheritance, and Dad's so-called rise in business came with a lot of help from his golf buddies, who conveniently happened to be lawyers, executives, and investment bankers. Despite all the help they received, they believed in a brutal kind of independence when it came to me. They were the type of people who would bend over backward to help others if it made them look generous. If one of their friends' kids needed a summer job, Dad would pull strings to get them in at his company. If my cousin Brooke needed money for a down payment on her first car, Mom would have her checkbook out before Brooke could even finish the sentence. But when I needed something, suddenly they became philosophers about the virtues of building character. Help became their code word for "you're on your own." When I was 17, I got into Northwestern University. It had been my dream school for years. I had worked hard, kept my grades pristine, and participated in every extracurricular activity that would help me stand out. The tuition, however, was staggering. I thought they would at least help with books, maybe with housing. I was not expecting them to cover everything, but I hoped for some acknowledgement that they wanted me to succeed. Instead, they sat me down at our glossy oak dining table, the one that was more for show than for family meals, and told me that they were not going to fund my lifestyle choices. I remember my dad leaning back in his chair, his voice calm but firm as he said, "If you want it, figure it out yourself." It was as if they thought I was asking them to finance a luxury vacation. I was asking for an education. So I figured it out. I worked 2 jobs, one during the day at a small independent bookstore, and another overnight at a 24-hour diner where I learned how to fake a smile at 2 in the morning while serving burnt coffee to half-asleep truckers and college kids cramming for exams. I averaged maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. My diet consisted mostly of black coffee, the occasional free blueberry muffin from the bookstore, and whatever scraps I could bring home from the diner. I pushed through it all. I graduated with honors and $65,000 in student debt. My parents showed up to my graduation wearing matching Ralph Lauren outfits, clapping proudly as if they had been my biggest supporters all along. I remember standing there for the photos, smiling stiffly and wondering if they even realized that every accolade I had earned was despite them, not because of them. A few years later, I had an idea for an online boutique. I had always had an eye for finding unique thrifted clothes and artisan goods, and I had been selling thrift store finds on eBay since college to help make ends meet. I saw a way to scale that into something bigger. I asked my parents for a $10,000 loan, not a gift, a loan with interest. I even brought them a detailed business plan, showing how I would pay it back. My dad chuckled like I had just told him a joke and said, "Sweetheart, we do not throw money at silly hobbies." I remember my mom giving me a look of polite dismissal, as if she had already decided this conversation was a waste of her time. So I did what I had always done. I built it myself. I maxed out 2 credit cards. I learned web design from YouTube tutorials. I skipped meals to keep my budget in check. I spent endless nights photographing inventory, writing product descriptions, and answering customer emails. The first year, I barely broke even. The second year, I started turning a profit. By the 3rd year, my silly hobby was a 6-figure business with employees, a loyal customer base, and my own loft office in Chicago. I had built a brand people trusted, and I had done it without a single penny from them. Then, last month, I got a text from my mom that simply said, "Call me, it's important." When I called, she told me that Dad's company had gone under after a lawsuit. They had lost most of their savings and were selling the house. There was a new tone in her voice, something I had not heard before need. She asked if I could find a place for your father in my company, because, in her words, family helps family. I invited them over for dinner. They arrived wearing clothes that looked like they had come from the clearance rack at Kohl's, playing the part of humbled victims of circumstance. Halfway through dessert, Dad began what I can only describe as a rehearsed pitch about becoming my strategic consultant to synergize brand direction. I could hear the corporate jargon rolling off his tongue as if he was speaking to a room full of shareholders. I let him finish, then I smiled and said, "Oh, I do not think my business has room for someone who does not throw money at silly hobbies. Remember?" The silence that followed was perfect. My mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My dad's face turned a shade of red I had not seen before. They left without even touching the tiramisu I had made. The next day, my Aunt Linda sent me a text calling me heartless and saying that I should be ashamed for not helping my parents in their time of need. I just thought, funny how family matters now that I'm the one with the checkbook. About a week after the tiramisu dinner disaster, my phone rang at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning. The time alone set off alarms in my head. My mother does not voluntarily emerge into the world before 10 a.m. unless something catastrophic has happened, there's a police report with her name on it, or she has a favor to ask that cannot wait. I sat there for a second, staring at the screen, wondering if letting it go to voicemail would be the smarter move. Curiosity won. I answered, keeping my voice neutral, and was met with the sound of a shaky inhale followed by a soft, theatrical sniffle. She told me it was just awful, stretching the word like it had to cross a finish line. She launched into her explanation without pausing for me to respond. Apparently, the charming luxury apartment they had been eyeing as their grand downsizing destination had cruelly slipped through their fingers. This wasn't just any apartment. It had an on-site pool, a rooftop lounge, a gym with personal trainers on call, and something she emphasized as a concierge service, like she was describing access to a private palace. But the application had been denied. She painted the landlord as some unfeeling bureaucrat incapable of recognizing quality tenants when they saw them. Her voice dripped with indignation, but under the self-righteous tone, I could hear the wobble of someone about to ask for something. It didn't take long for her to get there. She finally admitted that the denial wasn't due to a clerical error or bad luck, but because my father's credit score was in ruins so far gone that she described it like a crime scene. The solution, in her mind, was obvious. All I needed to do was co-sign a lease. It would be temporary, she insisted. I wouldn't have to lift a finger after signing. They would pay on time without fail. This was just family helping family. I had my coffee mug halfway to my lips, and the absurdity of what she was asking almost made me laugh into it. She was asking me to tie my spotless credit to two people who had never met a debt they didn't think they could charm their way out of. I reminded her, politely, for the moment, that she and Dad still owed $40,000 to the golf club they weren't even members of anymore. I told her that attaching myself to that kind of chaos was not happening. The way she reacted, you would think I had told her I was putting them out on the street. She sucked in her breath sharply, like the sound a sitcom character makes when someone drops a scandalous bomb. Then came a speech. She began listing all the things they had given me over the years, her voice full of wounded pride. They had allowed me to live in a safe neighborhood, she said, as if the safety of my childhood streets was a luxury they had bestowed rather than a baseline parental responsibility. They had provided food, she said, in the same tone someone might use to describe donating a kidney. She included paying for school lunches when I was in elementary, driving me to soccer practice, and even always making sure there was milk in the fridge as examples of their generosity. I sat there in my pajamas, letting her pile up her arguments without interruption. When she finally stopped, I pointed out that everything she had listed was, in fact, the bare minimum the state would also require parents to do. I could practically hear her swallow whatever comeback she had been about to launch. I reminded her that when I was 18 and desperately needed a cosigner for student loans, she had refused without hesitation, yet now she wanted me to risk my credit so she could have access to a rooftop fire pit. The hypocrisy was staggering, and I wanted her to hear the weight of it without me raising my voice. There was a pause long enough for me to think she might hang up. Instead, she told me I had turned into a cold person. I told her the truth, that I had been in the cold long enough to learn how to keep myself warm. The line went dead a moment later. 5 minutes after that, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Aunt Linda, swooping in as the self-appointed family moral authority. She told me my mother was very upset and that I should be ashamed of myself. I sent back a thumbs-up emoji and went back to drinking my coffee. 2 days after the cosign fiasco, my cousin Brooke decided it was her turn to step into the ring. She is not what anyone would call a master of subtlety. If there is a passive-aggressive point to be made, she will make it in neon lights and underlined in glitter. That morning, she posted a Facebook status that read, "Some people forget where they came from when they get money." It was the kind of thinly veiled jab that only fools the person writing it. I saw it before I had even finished my first cup of coffee, and I could practically hear her smug voice behind the words. Brooke has always been a fascinating case study in selective memory. This is the same cousin who, at 17, called me crying because she needed a ride to work after totaling her car, and then turned around 3 years later and asked my parents for a down payment on a new one. They wrote her a check in less than 5 minutes. She never paid it back. She has coasted through life on the kind of family handouts I was never offered, so for her to imply that I had somehow forgotten my roots was laughable. I could have ignored it. I could have rolled my eyes, closed the app, and gone on with my day. But there is something deeply satisfying about responding to performative nonsense with cold, hard facts. Instead of typing out a comment, I went digging through my old photo folders. It didn't take long to find exactly what I needed: a photo of me at 19, in my stained diner uniform, hair pulled back into a messy bun that was more grease than style, standing behind the counter at 3 a.m. holding a plate of pancakes. The look on my face was the exact mixture of exhaustion and numb survival that comes from cleaning maple syrup off a bathroom wall at 2 in the morning because a drunk frat boy thought it would be hilarious to pour it over the sink. I uploaded the photo and captioned it, "I remember exactly where I came from." That was all it needed. No hashtags, no tagging her name, no extra context. The image spoke volumes. The comment section took on a life of its own within minutes. Half the family hit the like button immediately, probably relieved someone had finally said something without actually saying something. A few relatives left vague, "so proud of you" comments, the kind that carry a mix of genuine admiration and thinly veiled schadenfreude. My old college roommate jumped in with, "That's the face of a woman building an empire," which earned a flood of laughing reactions. Even a few old diner regulars recognized the uniform and chimed in with stories about how I used to make the best hash browns in the county. Brooke, on the other hand, went silent. No reply, no defense, no attempt at a comeback. But a quick check later revealed that she had quietly unfollowed me. Honestly, best outcome of 2025 so far. Last weekend, my mother extended an invitation to what she described as a casual family barbecue, so we could patch things up. The words alone set off alarms in my head. My mother does not do casual. She does curated. And in our family, patch things up is almost always code for get ambushed by multiple relatives at once. My gut told me to stay home, but my curiosity told me it might be worth showing up, if only for the entertainment value. I decided that if I was walking into a setup, I was going to walk in armed. The second I stepped through the gate to the backyard, I knew my instincts had been correct. This wasn't just a few burgers on the grill with immediate family. My mother had assembled what looked like half of our extended bloodline, all seated in strategic clusters, like she'd mapped the seating arrangement in advance. There were cousins I hadn't seen in years, great-aunts who still called me by my childhood nickname, and a few in-laws who looked like they'd been bribed to attend. I could feel the weight of their stares before I even made it to the patio, and the air had that tight, expectant quality you get before a family intervention. It didn't take a genius to figure out the agenda. I was about to be cornered and reasoned with about how unfair I was being to my parents, how family helps family, and how I should do the right thing by stepping in financially. What they didn't know is that I had no intention of spending the afternoon defending myself. If they wanted a spectacle, I was going to give them one, but on my terms. Instead of showing up with a potato salad or some store-bought brownies, I had called one of the most expensive steakhouses in Chicago the day before and placed a catering order that would make a hedge fund manager blush. When I arrived, I carried in an insulated stack of trays holding filet mignon sliders, lobster mac and cheese bubbling under a layer of golden breadcrumbs, truffle fries dusted with Parmesan, and a charcuterie board so elaborate it looked like edible art. The smell alone cut through the smoky tang of the grill like a luxury car pulling into a used lot. I didn't say a word at first. I just began unpacking the spread in the center of the picnic table, lining up the dishes like trophies. A few people's eyes widened. Others leaned forward, trying to identify the unfamiliar dishes. My mother, mid-conversation with one of my aunts, went completely silent as she realized this was not potato salad from the corner deli. My father, who had been tending the grill like it was his personal stage, stopped flipping burgers and turned to watch. Once everything was laid out and the smell had everyone's attention, I smiled and announced, loudly enough for the whole patio to hear, that no one needed to worry. It was all paid for with silly hobby money. The phrase landed exactly the way I intended, sharp enough to cut through the manufactured civility in the air. I saw a few cousins cover their mouths to hide smirks. My Uncle Carl, who hasn't spoken to my father in years, let out a short laugh and immediately asked if I had a business card. My father's jaw tightened, and after about 15 minutes of stiff silence, he muttered something about disrespect, set down the spatula, and walked into the house without looking back. The rest of the afternoon carried on with an odd mix of tension and indulgence. Some relatives clearly felt they should continue the original mission of pressuring me, but their enthusiasm waned the longer they had access to perfectly cooked filet sliders and creamy lobster mac. People who had come ready to lecture me were now distracted by the quality of the truffle fries. A few asked cautious questions about my business, their tones tinged with the kind of curiosity that comes from realizing someone might actually know what they're doing. My mother kept trying to smile as if she was in control of the situation, but she never once touched the food. And then there was my grandmother. She waited until the attention had shifted elsewhere, reached out with perfectly manicured fingers to take another slider, and leaned in just enough so that only I could hear her. My grandmother just took another slider and whispered, "Good girl." 3 days ago, I got a call from a boutique owner in a suburb about 20 minutes from my office. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, figuring it could be a potential client or collaboration. Instead, I was greeted by a polite but cautious voice introducing herself and explaining that she owned a small but high-end clothing boutique. She said she hoped she wasn't overstepping, but she had a question about my father. My curiosity was instantly piqued. She went on to explain that my dad had recently applied for a consulting position with her store. At first, she said, his application looked promising. He had decades of business leadership experience and had claimed to have personally mentored me into the success I have today. That was the point where she hesitated, saying she figured it would be smart to get my take before making any decisions. I could almost picture her leaning back in her chair, trying to gauge my reaction without outright saying she didn't believe him. The mental image of my father selling himself as the mastermind behind my career was almost enough to make me joke. I told her that if by mentored he meant telling me to sink or swim while he bought another BMW, then yes, absolutely, he was a visionary. I could hear her start laughing before I even finished the sentence, and then she actually snorted. It was the kind of laugh that told me she'd already been skeptical and was just looking for confirmation. She thanked me for my honesty and said that in that case, she didn't think he was a good fit for her shop. I figured that would be the end of it, but apparently in small business circles, especially in suburbs where everyone knows everyone, word travels fast. By the end of the day, I got a text from my cousin letting me know that my dad was feeling humiliated because the business community is talking. I didn't bother pretending to be surprised. I just said, guess he'll have to figure it out himself. And finally, this week brought a plot twist so perfectly ironic that if it were in a movie, people would call it unrealistic. I got a forwarded email from my old high school principal, someone I hadn't heard from in years. At first I thought it was spam, but then I read it. My parents, in a move that could only be described as peak Richard and Diane strategy, had pitched the idea of me speaking at an upcoming alumni fundraiser as the proud daughter of Richard and Diane Blake. The email was full of warm praise about how inspiring my family's success story was and how having me speak would really help drive donations. The principal seemed genuinely enthusiastic, writing that it would be such a joy to hear me share my journey and how my parents had been a guiding force in it. I could practically feel my parents' fingerprints all over the narrative, leaving out the inconvenient reality and painting themselves as benevolent visionaries who had been behind me every step of the way. I sat there for a good minute, rereading the email, picturing my parents rehearsing their proud, modest smiles in the mirror, ready to bask in the glow of my achievements. They wanted the optics without the accountability. They wanted to stand in the wings while I delivered a glossy, PR-friendly fairy tale about how their unwavering support had launched me into success. So I said yes on one condition. I would speak, but I would tell the real story. No revisions, no rewrites, no, let's soften that part about the student debt. I have already started drafting my speech, and it pulls no punches. It includes the now legendary line my parents delivered when I got into Northwestern: "We're not going to fund your lifestyle choices," right there in the opening section. It covers the years I spent juggling diner graveyard shifts and bookstore day shifts, running on caffeine fumes while paying my way through school. I've even added a visual aid, a slideshow of photos from my college years, including the one of me in my syrup-stained uniform at 3 a.m. holding a plate of pancakes with the dead-eyed expression of someone calculating how many tips it will take to cover the electric bill. The event is next month, and I have already confirmed that the slideshow projector works perfectly. The thought of my parents sitting in the front row, smiling for the crowd as their carefully crafted image unravels in real time, is enough to make me giddy. I am not going to humiliate them for sport, but I am going to tell the truth. If that truth happens to be uncomfortable, that's not my fault. It's just the story as it happened. If the universe has any sense of humor, they will be right there in their country club best, gripping the armrests while the audience eats up every word about how their mentorship consisted of letting me sink or swim while they enjoyed their BMW upgrades. And I will be standing there on stage, not as the product of their generosity, but as the product of my own grit. So to everyone who's been following along through this whole saga, thank you for sticking with me, for laughing with me, and for sending me the perfect mix of outrage and encouragement every time a new twist drops. If there's a moral here, it's this: don't burn bridges with your kids unless you're absolutely certain you will never need to cross them again. And also, never underestimate a woman who knows how to make a PowerPoint petty.